Hey everybody, Alex here for Nerdy Inc., joined by Steve for a review of Game of Thrones.
Hello.
We're doing a sort of different kind of review here, mainly because there's a lot to cover. Steve and I both watch this show religiously, and Steve's a book reader. So I figured it'd be a good way for us to cover a whole bunch of different bases and make sure that we give a very in-depth review. So before we start going into each individual storyline, Steve, do you want to just give your quick summary of the season as a whole?
Yeah, I really liked season 5 as a book reader. I think they did a lot of great things, especially in terms of pacing. If any of you who are listening to this are book readers, you know how much of a slog 4 and especially 5 got, where you were sort of watching Tyrion or reading Tyrion travel on a ship and complain about daddy issues, and Daenerys was sitting on a throne and not knowing how to rule while people were getting killed, and it got really frustrating. So season 5 did a really good job, I think, of quickening things, making characters come together easier. I also like the more drama focus. It seemed more character heavy this time. There we did get some nice, cool twists and stuff, even for book readers, actually. But we'll get to that later. We did get some nice twists, but mostly it felt like sort of like a Sopranos, The Wire kind of character study, which I thought was a great direction for the season to go. But I know some people initially were a little worried. Alex, what did you think of season 5 as a whole?
As someone who has not read the books and did not know how slow they were, I thought the season got off to a very slow start. I was sitting here watching all of these stories where I felt like they weren't developing as quickly as they were in previous seasons. I just felt that it was a lot of trying to maintain the status quo, and it was a lot of treading water just until they got to the final stretch of maybe three episodes or so. So I found the first couple episodes a little frustrating in terms of my happiness with how they played out.
I would completely understand that from, as somebody who's been there just in a different format. I'm not recommending you read the books now.
So, I guess right now we'll jump into sort of individual character plot lines and give our sort of review on each individual one. And we're going to go sort of worst to best, or smallest to biggest, or least important to most important, depending how you look at it. So, let's start off with Brienne and Podrick.
Yes, they didn't have a whole lot to do this season, did they? They just kind of sat around in like the same spot. The last 4 episodes, it was just like them sitting outside of Winterfell for like 4 episodes until Brienne gets her, Stanish vanquishing moment. Which, spoilers, by the way, in case you made it this far and didn't figure that it would be that kind of review, it is that kind of review. So Pod and Brienne, I like them. I like them as a pair. I really like them in season 4, trouncing around. I just wish they had more stuff to do. But as a book reader, I know there's more stuff there, but they're just withholding it. So
I agree. I felt that it was them sort of, basically the show is saying, well, we have these 2 actors under contract and we want to just remind everyone that they're there. So they threw in dialogue that didn't really do anything for me. There was an argument between Podrick and Brienne that basically was just them arguing over whether or not they should be there, and I felt like they had that same argument at the end of last season too, and it was just a lot of repeat stuff for me, and so
yeah,
that's why I don't know. I was not in. Just didn't care.
yeah, they had that moment at the beginning where they ran into Sansa when she was traveling with Littlefinger, and Brienne offers her, swears her allegiance because she promised stuff to Catelyn Stark. It was one of those moments where the show like brought 2 characters together and was like, ooh, I wonder what the possibilities could be, and then they just bring them back apart again. So it was kind of a red herring, I guess, sort of. She knew she was keeping track of Sansa. She was tracking her, which is how she knew she ended up at Winterfell. So I guess it set that up, but in terms of seeing some more interesting character interaction, I think, I don't want to say it's a missed opportunity because there was a lot going on this season, I thought, but,
Especially, I just felt that there's a lot of things that were almost rushed later on.
Yes.
And we got a lot of things that weren't developed.
We'll talk about that, I'm sure.
I didn't need to see them sort of just spinning their wheels outside of Winterfell. I would have liked to have seen things devoted and other stories fleshed out more.
Speaking of stories that were not fleshed out at all, I think now is the time to move on to Dorne. And
Indeed.
again, I was super excited when I heard Jaime and Bronn were going on a buddy road trip to Dorne. I thought we were going to get some really good stuff. And that was, I think, for me, aside from Pot and Brienne, which is just sort of like a footnote, I think that was the worst part of the season. Book readers know that the sand snakes, there are 7 of them, I believe, in the books, so they condensed them down to 3. There's also a whole. I'll get into more of this later after a summary. But yeah, so Ron and Jaime go into Dorne to rescue Chicken Marsala from the Dornish prince. And Cersei, this is at Cersei's behest because she believes she's in danger because the Sand Snakes want her as revenge for Oberyn, which is a fine setup. I thought the setup was fine, like revenge for Oberyn. But this just felt like a waste. The characters, the Sand Snakes especially, felt underdeveloped and sort of one-linery. And there just wasn't a whole lot going on. What did you think?
Well, this was an interesting story for me because it didn't bother me as much that the characters were sort of one note, because we've seen one note characters before. I'm sort of familiar with one note characters. The thing that bothered me about this plot line was that there were no stakes.
No.
There were, I mean, first of all, if you ask the most people, they will all tell you that the Lannisters are the least liked group of them all. No one likes the Lannisters. And so when you say, well, there's a character we've never really seen on screen, but it's Cersei's daughter and Joffrey's brother, most people are going to say, screw her. We don't.
Yeah.
Who likes her? And so to have 2 characters go and rescue someone who we have no attachment to, the stakes just could not have been lower for that storyline. So whether they succeeded or failed in Dorne, I did not care.
I would 100% agree that the scope definitely wasn't broad enough. Which is frustrating because you saw that moment at the end where Chicken Marsala, I'm just going to keep using that joke until I never pronounce her name correctly, knows that Jaime is her father. So it felt like they could have gone in that direction more sooner, and I think is what they were going for. Like, the reason Jaime's going is because this is his daughter, not because it's his niece. You know, like
or his sworn duty.
Right? Yeah, exactly. This is his daughter, and that's really important. And I think it was easy to forget that, and I don't think the show did a good enough job of making those stakes feel real. And then, like, she dies at the end as soon as she realizes it, and it was like, all right, whatever, moving on. Time to close the book on Dorne.
Yeah, that was the thing that bothered me the most, was the fact that she died even solidified even more to me that I don't care about this storyline, because it'd be one thing if she turns out she's really important, but she's not important. She literally has done nothing on the plot. So I almost feel validated in my belief that it was not worth my time.
It was nice to see a character happy for a little while when she was going to go on the boat with what's his name, the prince, and they were going to marry and be happy, and they found true love. And isn't that so nice? Because that just does not exist in the Game of Thrones universe. But I guess before we move on, I think it's just, as a book reader, there's another part of book 4 that they completely cut out, which is potential they'll do next season. But there's a whole Iron Islands plot that they cut out, and I know the showrunners sort of had to pick and choose which one they were going to pick. They were either going to pick that one or Dorne. So for book readers, it's up to you whether or not you think they made the right choice pursuing Dorne. I think so, because they had the setup with Oberyn as opposed to introducing a whole bunch of new characters. I don't know if you have much of an opinion on that, if you would have liked to see some Iron Island stuff instead.
Not really. I think they did make the right choice with Dorne, just because if there was a whole season of Iron Islands, then they go, well, remember Oberyn when he died 2 seasons ago? Now they're going to take care of that. I think it just didn't make the most sense to do it now.
All right, time to move on to our next victim plot line, Sansa.
Sansa Stark.
Poor Sansa.
I gotta say, this plot line had the strongest fan reaction out of any of them because of the obvious. I'm just gonna go right to it. Obviously, her sexual assault was the big discussion point that happened halfway through the season. Before that, all that really happened was we knew that she was going to marry Ramsay Snow. She had to live with him for a little bit. Then after that was the big turning point in which she then basically started her little mini rebellion with trying to turn Theon back to her side, trying to get that candle lit, trying to signal to Brienne that she needs help because she knows Brienne was there somehow.
Well, the lady told her, she's like, you have friends if you need help light the tower, so.
Right, right, right. The thing I don't want to say that I don't want to say I was happy to see Sansa get sexually assaulted because that's a horrible opener. But
Let me explain myself. Hold on.
but it didn't surprise me at all. I knew a lot of people were shocked by it and surprised. But realistically, if you were to tell me someone's going to be forced to marry Ramsay Snow, that's the first thing that I would have guessed would have happened.
Yes.
Was that she would have been brutalized in some way, shape, or form.
I think that's definitely the shape a lot of the argument about this is taken. I think the real question on like a narrative level, aside from the content, on a narrative level, did we really need to see Ramsay doing another horrible act? Because we already know he's a big asshole. And did we really need to see Sansa get brutalized again, or stripped of her identity, or stripped of herself? Because she, time and time again, every single season, she's the one that, pardon the expression, gets screwed over, over and over again.
Right.
So you could say it didn't really do anything, but at the same time, like, I don't know, I thought it was okay. Like, it was surprising. I didn't think it was offensive. I'm not quite sure where that argument comes from. I think also they had the fact that Theon was watching. I think that was part of the character development going on there was more about Theon than Sansa, which I guess you could say would lead to his motivation for rescuing her later, which is really, I thought that was really quick, that all of a sudden she was like, oh, let me kill this person. I mean, somebody else I read said it was that, like, because Theon realized Ramsay was going to do to Sansa what he did to him, so that's why he didn't want her to go through that. But it's still, I don't know, it felt like a quick turnaround for me.
I don't know. I thought it was natural that his flip from Reek back to Theon, because there was a couple points where you saw it sort of starting to come. You could tell he really wanted to do it. He was afraid.
I mean, you were rooting for it the whole season, obviously.
Right. And then the one other thing before we move on is I do want to just say that I get the argument that it wasn't really necessary and we didn't really need to see yet another horrible act to Sansa or by Ramsay, or even just another horrible act to a woman, because obviously more horrible things have happened to women than men on this show. So there is a bit of a gender bias there. But Sophie Turner did come out and say that the producers did talk to her about it beforehand, and she was 100% on board. Just this week, Gwendolyn Christie, who plays Brienne, is saying, yes, these acts are horrible, but that's the point. They're supposed to be horrible. We need to... It starts more discussions, because I don't think we would be having the discussion on sort of gender roles, inequality, and what things were like back in historical times versus what they are now. We wouldn't even be having that discussion without it. So, do the pros outweigh the cons? I don't know.
I mean, look, it was a logical scene. The characters, weren't out of character, during that, and I think that I think it would be sort of disingenuous if that wasn't how things turned out. It would certainly go against the characters. Again, the argument about whether or not it was actually needed is sort of for a different
or
thing.
Or even shown on screen,
or even
as opposed
shown,
to hinted in the background.
That's okay. That's what I was going to talk about. I don't think it was a bad scene. It's definitely not going to crack my, top 10 Game of Thrones moments, or like even like most shocking moments. I thought it was fine. It was effective. I felt really awful watching it. So they definitely did a good job with it. It's not, I don't think it's a question of the artistic integrity of the scene, or if the actors or actresses weren't okay with it. It's sort of got this broad meta issue going on now, which I think is just a reaction to current discussions that were already happening, some of which are the result of the show, some of which coming from other places, and this just sort of added fuel to the fire on its own.
So, I guess the next...
Speaking of women
who go through some horrible acts of tormenture, Cersei.
Yes.
Cersei Lannister.
Finally gets her comeuppance.
Indeed. To the point where a lot of people actually sympathized. She was the least sympathetic Lannister at this point.
Yep.
And she finally got her moment to have pity be
Be
pitied.
put, have pity forcefully put on her.
Yes.
Yeah, for book readers, this is really interesting because for those who don't know, the books are broken up into point of view characters. So it's not first person, but it's third person, whatever the non-omnipotent one is. So you only get one character's perspective of any event at a time, and you do not get Cersei's until the fourth book, which is when this goes down. So you're brought even more into her mind in the books. The show has sort of been doing this all along. You've sort of gotten Cersei's perspective, I think. You get the quieter moments with her and Robert Baratheon in the first season and stuff like that. Um, I thought her arc is a good arc. It felt like something was missing in the middle of the season. I feel like she disappeared for a little while until it came back up again, which sort of maybe screwed the pacing up. But yeah, she tries to. Obviously, she's in the book. She's paranoid. I don't think she was paranoid so much as just trying to be confident in her political moves. But obviously, she's trying not to lose power to Marjorie. That's her big butting heads. And she tries. She turns to the Faith Militant as a way to try to hold on to that power, and that ultimately ends up backfiring on her. So, Alex, what did you think of Cersei's plotline?
I'm going to work a little bit backwards here because I want to end on a specific point. So I thought that again the sort of shame walk through, what was that, Flea Bottom? What, I don't know.
Yeah,
What
it's
that was.
just King's Landing in general, I think.
That was obviously that was effective at showing sort of, that was the most morally gray point I think of the season in terms of looking at a character who, that's what the show's so good at, is taking characters that we hate and
It was
making
Jamie third season, Jamie fourth season maybe.
Exactly. There's always that one character that you sort of look at and you sort of pity in some way, shape, or form. And this was Cersei's point to finally realize that, oh, no matter how horrible a person are, was this punishment justified for what she's done? Bearing in mind that this was not a punishment for
Right.
killing Robert and having incest babies and doing all the. This was a punishment just for her having an affair with her cousin. That's all this was a punishment for, which I think a lot of people actually almost forgot, because obviously as viewers we know that Cersei's done all of these horrible things, when in reality she's only being punished for one thing. We have yet to know if the Faith Militant, when they put her on trial, is going to convict her of any of the other things that she's still accused of.
Yep.
So that's a good way to put it into perspective on that front. So going back how she got there, it certainly was a power play, her trying to get over on Marjorie. I thought that the dialogue between her and Marjorie was my favorite part
Yes.
of their reaction,
Someone's-
because I've always loved their interaction, because that's even before she married Joffrey even. Marjorie has just always had just a little bit of snark that made her so much fun, and seeing them try to outwit each other was always a blast for me.
I agree. And it's interesting. I think part of the reason I made that comment earlier about feeling like there wasn't enough Cersei in the season was because that's what the season opened with. It was her as a kid coming across the witch who makes those, prophecies or whatever, that someone more beautiful than herself will one day steal her accomplishments.
That's right, I forgot
So
about that.
yeah, it's easy to forget about, but it definitely set the stage. And I got excited as a book reader because I knew immediately, as soon as I saw the hut, I was like, I know. As soon as I saw the kid, I think they did a good job with the resemblance matching. I was like, I know what this is. I know where this season's going. This is going to be good. So I guess on one hand, I was a little disappointed that they didn't explore that more in the middle. It was like they got her into the cell and then just sort of held off until the finale. But I mean, that's the issue of the show as it was.
But the only minor complaint that I had was, I felt that the Faith Militant, when the Faith Militant was in the spotlight, and there was sort of that power struggle between the Faith Militant trying to restore their values versus the powerful people who were trying to instill their own, that was extremely reminiscent of Daenerys' plot, which was happening simultaneously. And so I felt like I was getting two similar of the stories at the same time.
Right. And I think that's intentional. I mean, by the show, and the showrunners, obviously, you're looking for similar themes to structure your episodes on. But go on, please.
Well, when you compare the two, they were too similar to me that I felt like I was watching just retreading of the same ground, especially because I didn't think Cersei, the faith militant versus the corrupt upper echelon of people in King's Landing, I didn't find that as interesting a moral dilemma as Daenerys was facing. So as we move over to Meereen, I think it's a good time to talk about Daenerys' predicament.
Definitely.
I thought that this was a really good look at sort of the struggle, sort of the power balance, because at the end of the day, it's basically an issue of progressive versus tradition. And is tradition, for the sake of tradition, good, or is there value in tradition? And that's something you see across every government, across every ruler, from right now to as back as time goes. So I thought that there was a certain timelessness about sort of the Daenerys needing to make a decision about who to please, what was the best way to rule over Meereen, and I thought that it showed a lot of compromises in a realistic way, her trying to figure out the best way to be an effective ruler because she wants to be a good ruler. Whereas Cersei was trying to use the faith militant for her own personal gain, Daenerys clearly took a moral opposition to the killing pits and a moral opposition to slavery. But there was this rich culture around the fighting pits and around sort of the class structure of Meereen that it was a difficult way for her to basically make difficult decisions for her.
And I think I think you see more with this plotline probably than anything else. The issues George R. R. Martin sort of starts to have in the books, which is how does he get Daenerys over to Westeros? Because obviously the Meereen stuff is all like a learning situation for her. She's never ruled before, so she's ruling people who not just aren't her own, but have a completely different culture from her that she's trying to learn and adapt. And you could say it'll be a little better in Westeros, but not necessarily. I don't think she's going to be greeted with open arms, right from the get-go, especially with what her father did. Yeah, I mean, Daenerys for me was really frustrating in the books to read because it was sort of the same chapters over and over again. The pacing was better this time. I still felt it was a little like, I don't know. I didn't get excited whenever I saw Daenerys or Meereen come up on screen.
Tyrion was an interesting one this season because I felt like obviously we love Tyrion because he's sassy and he's got that wit. And I thought that it was sort of hindered a bit by the fact that he was just angry about being stuffed in a boat for however long it took him to get from King's Landing to Essos. And then Jorah had him tied up for a good chunk of the time. So I felt like we didn't get a lot of Tyrion. He didn't really blossom until he eventually met up with Daenerys in the fighting pits.
And that's a meeting that book readers have been for years hoping. And, you guys, I think soon as just TV show watchers also joined on quick, was like, when is this matchup happening? And obviously you saw it coming. For non-book readers, yes, Tyrion is still just wandering around out there outside Meereen, and has not actually done anything yet. Daenerys ended where the book ended, which is where she's wandering around sort of on her own, and then she ends up getting found by some of the Blood Riders. But on a side note, that dragon in the last episode was way better CG than any of the dinosaurs in Jurassic World that I saw recently. I just want to make that point. There were times I thought they were using a puppet, maybe, because I know they did in the previous one when she was flying away. It was like just the neck looked real, and that was enough for it to put it in my head this whole time. Like, oh, is that a puppet? I don't know. I can't tell.
Right.
So I don't know. That made me happy. I saw that.
Yeah, the second to last episode of the season, episode 9, where finally, obviously the third to last episode had Daenerys and Tyrion meet, but then they just met and it was cut off. So the ninth episode was really their time to sort of bounce ideas off each other and be together. And that was an awesome episode in pretty much every way for me, seeing them finally sort of compromises, talk about politics, talk about leading. They re-kick out Jorah.
Yeah. Yep.
And then he fights in the pits and proves his worth by. At first, I gotta be honest, I thought he was throwing a spear at Daenerys's fiance there.
That's what they wanted you to think.
That's exactly what I believed. And then the harpies just popped out of nowhere and started taking over the place. And it was an awesome fight scene. I was really gratified when the dragon came and the awesome scene of her flying away. The only thing about that fight scene and the whole season as a whole, really too, was it made the Unsullied look like wimps.
Yeah.
I thought these are supposed to be, trained to perfection, just ultimate warriors, and they're getting slaughtered wholesale.
Yeah, that's part of the problem with well, not the problem, I guess, but in the books it's made more clear the Sons of the Harpy, it's not clear who they are or who they're working for. So obviously that's sort of, that's like any guerrilla fighting group. It's going to undercut the best army in the world. If they're pulling tactics like that, you don't know who to trust. You don't know what's what, and they're just slitting your throats in the middle of the night. So that's sort of why they are not seem as capable. Why they weren't as capable at the end, I have no idea. Maybe it regards who is actually running the Harpies. I don't know. I couldn't give you a definitive answer.
So then it leads to the fact that there still is an open door there, because as we left it, she's off in the mountainy areas of Essos, and the Grey Worm, Tyrion, and Missandei is her name?
I think so, something like that.
So they're left in charge of Meereen. And I think there's a good deal of story left. I was getting sick of Essos, and I was like, just come to Westeros already and start doing things. But I do care about this storyline enough to see it resolved.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good. They turned Daenerys around, because in the season 4 I was starting to get frustrated.
Yes. And that's definitely a problem that, book readers, again, had, but I think they're alleviating that. Like, he doesn't want Daenerys to just leave, and just, like, leave a shithole behind. So I think that's why now you're seeing Tyrion sort of take her place, so he'll be a good, ruler, him and the advisors and, Grey Worm and Missandei. So I think that's a good place to leave them, because it gives them hope that they'll sort things out there, and Daenerys gets to move on and fly across the sea.
So before we head back to Westeros, there's still one other character palling around the east, and that is good old Arya Stark.
One of the few remaining Starks in the world. They're a rare breed
Indeed.
now, and this one is trying to get rid of her Stark identity. Can she do it?
Tune in next week. This was the thing that I was most excited for, because I don't think there's a person out there who dislikes Arya. She's proved time and time again to be just the most resilient character, one of the funniest characters, and she's just great to watch. And so I would have watched an entire season of just Arya and Jaqen H'ghar in the House of Black and White the entire season, because it was so engrossing.
I think, if anything, that's the complaint you're going to see, is that maybe there wasn't enough Arya this season to fully flesh things out. For book readers, you'll notice the major change, which is that Arya in the book is blind pretty much as soon as she gets there. I forget what she does, or if she does anything, but one day she wakes up and she's blind. It's not in punishment to anything. So she has to learn how to sort of become an assassin when she's blind. Also, the whole thing with Meryn Trant was added. That was not part of the show, or part of the original books, excuse me. I think it worked really well. I think she's obviously still struggling with her past self and present self. I think, on the other hand, though, it might have sort of been frustrating, because it would have felt like the whole season was kind of useless, where, like, she's going through all this training, but, like, she hasn't learned anything. But again, this is the problem where the books, I can't even speculate, because she's done in the books at this point. Yeah. So
that was the one thing you mentioned it that I wasn't sure on. I wasn't sure how permanent her blindness was. So I would have liked a little bit more closure on that. Even if Jaqen just said a girl must learn to see beyond her eyes, or some stupid line like that, to just make it a little more clear what the heck is going on.
Yeah. I feel like it was clear in the books, but it's kind of pointless, I guess, to argue those sort of semantics at this point. That said, still really liked the House of Black and White stuff. I really liked the creepy room with the columns and the masks. That was done really well. I like her selling oysters, clams, and cockles around the thing that was from the books. I was still disappointed though. There was some more book stuff that maybe they'll do later. She does end up assassinating somebody in the books the way she's supposed to, and it's really cool how she does it. And I was disappointed that they just sort of decided to go this revenge route instead, and sort of, as a book reader, it feels like they pushed the reset button on her whole arc this season. But I don't know, maybe it worked better for you.
No, yeah, I thought it worked fine. What when you say push the reset button, what do you mean?
Because the whole time she's trying to get rid of her, she's no one. She's no longer Arya Stark.
So
she's trying to move forward.
She bounced back to,
and
like,
she
Arya
100%,
Stark,
she
and
100% bounced back.
her.
She went back to her list. It would have been different if she did this at the beginning of the season, and then she was blind, and then you got to see the after effects of that in her in the remainder of the season, to where she learns how to assassinate for real. Like, if they just shifted it, it probably would have been better. I mean, it's not that I didn't like those scenes or I didn't think that they worked or were logical, because obviously she's still struggling with this issue. But for a show that needs to start being more concise as it goes on, and not, it can't afford to spin wheels or bring characters back to places they were before if it's not, 100% intentional.
Yeah, I guess moral of the story is, I think this is sort of a theme that I'm noticing, is I think we're sick of waiting. I think we like seeing decisive action. I think we like...
Yes, if you're a Book 5 reader, you know that almost every single major character arc ended in a cliffhanger. So you get to read 1,000 pages of build-up and zero payoff. But the show did a good job of sort of giving you some payoff, and if we can jump over back into Westeros, Stannis had a whole lot of payoff, I think, as a character. I thought his whole arc, where that ended him up, whether or not he's dead or not, the whole thing with just everything, just his relationship with Melisandre, I thought was really well done. In the books, so it's on the record, he's still just wandering through the snow, heading towards Winterfell somewhere.
Was his army already defeated by Ramsay Bolton in the books?
No, I don't believe so. I feel like they might have had a skirmish, but I think that also involves the Iron Islands somehow. But he's like broken and battered, and it's freezing outside. He didn't burn his daughter Shireen, right?
Yes.
That was probably the single most horrifying moment I think I've had in the show to date. Just everything from the conversation he has with her, where she basically gives him her blessing to do what he has to do, and not realizing it. And the way the episode ends, it's sort of like you're left with this question, like, was that worth it? Is this going to help him, or is this sort of the beginning of the ends? And obviously we saw in the finale it was his unraveling. But I thought there was really good tension there with, how far are you willing to go for your birthright and to save face and all this other stuff. So what did you think of Stannis's arc this season? Stannis the Manus.
The hashtag Stannis the Manus. I was on Team Stannis all the way. I was even still on Team Stannis after he killed his daughter.
Well, it's not that he doesn't have any reason to believe that would work. I mean, Melisandre clearly has power and hasn't let him wrong before, so...
And it's not only Melisandre has power, it's that we talk about the Drowned God, and we talk about the Seven Gods, and we talk about all these different gods, and none of them have proven their ability to do anything except Melisandre, who says, Lord of Light can give you a shadow baby that will kill your brother, and she does it. Or Lord of Light could have two people duel, and one person gets stabbed by the Hound, and have him come back to life.
Yeah.
And I'm on board with the Lord of Light. Even if killing his daughter was the thing that undid Stannis, I'm still on Team Lord of Light, because he's the only god that has done anything so far in the book. But that's neither here nor there. Stannis, to me, his killing his daughter was sort of... You could read into that two different ways. You could say, well, he he either wants the throne a lot, or he would be a good enough king that he would be willing to sacrifice his own happiness to be king.
Right.
Because the thing is, Cersei, we go to about Cersei. She's evil, but she loves her family. She would never do anything to hurt her family, even though she wants power. Stannis loved his daughter. It's not like a Tywin Tyrion relationship where Tywin's like, this little guy. Stannis loved his daughter. So the question is, was he doing it for the good of the realm, or was he doing it for his own personal gain? And I think most people read into it as he did it for his own personal gain, and that's why he ultimately had his downfall, because he wasn't meant for the throne. But I think it is open for interpretation if there's any psychopaths like me who are willing to argue for Stannis.
You just really want to root for Stannis. No, that's an easy thing to do. He's definitely the most level-headed and probably most capable leader currently vying for the throne. Like, disregarding the whole Daenerys thing, who you could say is a pretty, crappy leader at this point in her life. But, yeah, Stannis is pretty level-headed. He weighs all the options. He listens to Davos. He listens to reason. This is the first sort of unreasonable thing he's done, but even as we've discussed, it's not really that unreasonable because he has reason to believe that this will work. So yeah, I mean, it's really frustrating. It's hard not to know unless we're looking forward, into the next season, whether or not Brienne actually killed Stannis at the end. Yeah, and if Stannis isn't dead, then for what purpose? Why would Brienne stop? Why didn't they show Stannis getting killed? The show does a pretty good job of viscerally showing character deaths to make sure that they're dead. And usually if they don't, it's for a specific purpose. So
while Stannis may have failed, I still do have faith in Melisandre, who is currently at the Wall. There was a lot of Jon Snow this season, and a lot of just as much ambiguity there in terms of being a leader, because this is the thing that was difficult watching Jon Snow and his interactions with the other men of the Night's Watch. We, as viewers, know that Jon Snow is right. We see zombie ice people coming up and walking and raising the dead and wiping out hordes of wildlings. We all see this, so we have no trouble believing that Jon Snow is telling the truth about White Walkers. But to the people who have been watching The Wall for lifetimes upon lifetimes, it's sheer madness. To have a guy come in here, I mean, that would be the equivalent of someone running for president and saying, listen, I know there's those ISIS guys over in the Middle East. We need to let them into America because the Canadians have zombies. Like, it would sound, you'd laugh him out of town. You'd never let that guy become president. So it's very understandable for the men of the Night's Watch to not believe Jon Snow, because there's no, unless they were one of the select few who were with the Wall and happened to see him, like Samwell Tarly, who's unfortunately gone when he's needed. There's really not a whole lot of precedent for Jon Snow, and Jon was, I don't want to say he was arrogant, but he was too focused on the big picture to know how much he needed to win over the other men of the Night's Watch.
Yep, I think that's the common critique I think you're going to see of Jon Snow, is that he thinks like nobody else in Westeros thinks. And the way he thinks is the way Westeros needs a thinker leader, which obviously does not jive with just about 99% of the population at this current time. So that's, ultimately leads to his downfall at the end. I don't know, I knew what was going to happen, but did they set the stuff up with Ollie like too obvious? Like, was that obvious to you?
I knew that there was discontent. I knew that Ollie and I knew that Sir Alistair didn't like him, but I was surprised. I didn't think that they were going to kill him. In all honesty, they always say don't attach people, no one's safe. I thought, to this day, till Sunday, I would have thought that Tyrion, Daenerys, and Jon Snow were the only three that were safe because they seemed so vital to the plot. I was shocked that
it sucks, doesn't it?
It does,
doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
When I read that in the books, I wasn't worried. I'm still not worried, honestly. I know there's all sorts of interviews out there right now, but honestly, they don't mean anything.
Yeah. That's the I wholeheartedly believe that if Melisandre wasn't going to play some part
Right.
in this whole
And
thing, they wouldn't have made a point to show
yeah,
her
and I think that's the
walking
thing.
through the
Even
door.
even if it's I don't what I well I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't think John's story is done even if he is dead. I still think there's room to work with what he's done there and the effect he's had on other characters, especially Sam. Also in terms of maybe John coming back in ways that aren't normal, whether obviously we saw we'll get to Hard Home, I think, in a second because I want to talk about that in specifically. But coming back in ways that you weren't before, I think that's entirely possible to see. Uh, yeah,
There's a whole bunch of rumors
yeah,
in
it's a whole lot
terms
of
of
theories. I
yeah.
I read some other review that was like this whole season comes down to trust, and I would agree with that. I trust the showrunners. I trust George R. R. Martin. As much as it sucks when they do something like that, I think they know what they're doing when they're telling a story. So it, you know. But Hard Home, speaking of something that was not in the books at all, was really thrilling for me personally. And I know a lot of people share that. Because they did that whole thing last season where they like went off to save like Bran or whatever in the like Craster's Keep. You remember that?
Right.
That
Yeah.
was not in the books, and that felt like the biggest waste of time for me because I knew nothing would get done. Like I knew they would never cross paths with Bran. And I knew that everybody would be fine. It was too early on. Not enough important things had happened yet for them to be able to just kill somebody off, willy nilly, like they are now. However, Hard Home I thought was completely different because I think it added a lot to the world. It was an incredible action sequence. The effects were really, really, especially were really good. The CG, I thought One Wig, One Darwin was an incredible giant. I thought they did a good job with him. I thought it was scary. I thought it was really, filled with tension, even though you knew at that point the important characters were probably safe. No, Hard Home was really good, and you got to see, of course, it really sort of drove home how the gravity of the situation, which I think sets up, John's arc for the rest of the two episodes, which is you don't like they can slaughter a whole village because you can't kill them, and then just bring them all to my side. It's like dodgeball when you had that like one special ball that you'd hit and like bring like the other person to your team or whatever instead
Yep.
of killing. That's like what it is, but on a like mass slaughtering scale.
It was a really great sequence. I was engaged. I liked it. It was fun. It was cool to watch. My one complaint with it, though, it was so convenient for the plot to have Jon Snow say, "Hey guys, White Walkers are a problem," and have all the Wild Things go like, "Nah, you're crazy," and then they all just look up, and then the White Walkers attack right then and there. It
Yeah.
was like that's some astronomical
I mean,
coincidence.
yeah, yes, I mean, it was, but it was, and I feel like they're sort of building up to a White Walker
Yeah,
something
it was.
eventually. You knew
It
something
wasn't.
happened.
It was not big enough of a problem that I
Mhm. It
disliked
wasn't
its
like
presence or
for
its
me
role
the
in the
finale
plot.
too. I felt like Stannis' stuff was done with almost too quickly. It was like, oh, we're screwed. Like, all right, let's not think of a better plan. Let's just attack Winterfell. It was almost like let's be done with this thing. And I think part of that is Stannis knew it was over too, and the show watchers knew it was over and it was time to see it. I still thought it was a little quick. So
Right.
that was the only time I think the final episode was the only time the show had any like pacing issues for me. Obviously, because I thought it was better than the books.
All right. So I think that pretty much sums it up. So real quick, I guess, do you want to give me your favorite, least favorite, and the thing you're looking forward to the most for next season?
Yeah. Most favorite thing that happened to me was probably that happened to me personally. I think was Hard Home. Like I said, I think it was a great moment where both book readers and non-book readers could be surprised by something and excited. And I thought it was just an incredibly well done scene. In terms of least favorite, I think, it still goes to Dorne. I still think this is a really missed opportunity. And as for what I'm looking forward to next season is a harder question. But as a book reader, I feel like there's one more big surprise in the books, specifically in book four and a little bit in book five, that they could bring back. That if my prediction is correct, they will, which would be nice. Aside from that, though, I'm actually looking forward to Sam going. I know we didn't talk about Sam much, but his stuff going to the Meister place, I think is going to be interesting because there's some in between the line stuff in the books surrounding that. So I'm curious how they're gonna handle him becoming a Meister.
Okay. Well, for me, my Least favorite part was the fight, and I'm getting really specific. The fight between the Sand Snakes and Bronn and Jaime.
Yeah, a lot of people didn't like that.
Because it was an awkward fight because despite some of a lot of the
Choreography.
brutal things towards women,
Oh,
they were almost afraid to actually make the fight hurt anyone because they didn't want to hurt any of the women because it would not sit right if Jaime, someone who's become a hero to a lot of people, just immediately starts beating down these women. But it was just an awkward fight because they knew no one could die, no one could really get hurt, and it was just an awkward battle. That was my least favorite part. My favorite part was also at Hardhome, but to get a little bit more specific, my favorite part was when the basically Ice Darth Maul comes down and just raises his hands.
Yep.
Because before all of his friends, before all the wildlings then rose as walkers themselves, if the first thing it looked like was he was raising his arms like, "What up, John? Look what I just did." And it looked like this amazing power play right there, just saying, "Look at this devastation I brought." And then to have them all get up, I did not see that coming. I thought he was just saying, "Look around you, you're going to lose." And then to have all of them get up, I was like, oh my god, this guy does not mess around. So, Ice Darth Maul, really, that was awesome part of the scene for me. The thing I'm most anticipating is I'm really looking forward to seeing how Arya eventually comes back into play. Because while I am excited to see her become a faceless woman or basically server of the god of death, I would like to see how that plays into something. They're not just going to have her killing, gamblers around, Braavos. She's obviously going to come back into play in Westeros in some way, shape, or form. So I'm interested to see how that actually happens. Now, whether that happens next season or the final season, who knows? But I'm curious to see how she's going to play into the bigger picture.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a really good choice because even as a book reader, I don't know. And that's something that did cross my mind eventually, but you forget about is her and Daenerys. How are they going to come back?
All right, so I guess that's our review for Game of Thrones Season 5. It was a good season. So if you have thoughts of your own, let us know in the comments down below. But other than that, for more games, comics, movies, and more, keep it right here on Nerdy Inc.